Hi, I'm Zuby, from Magic with Zuby, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're listening to now, the opinions expressed are those of each individual host. Check out all other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of Better Podcasting. In this show, we're going to talk about what to do if you find yourself down a host and considering a replacement.
In this week's Better Podcasting download, we're going to go ahead and open up that podcast grave and give Blab some company.
And finally, in our Better Pod Back, we'll hear from you about what your audio recording chain most resembles.
Wait, am I supposed to use a microphone? Lauren, start the show now.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen John Drew, and with me, of course, is Stargate Pioneer.
It's been a great week. I'm glad to be behind the microphone again with Better Podcasting. We got a great show lined up for everybody, and let's just get into it, Stephen.
Why would we do that? I didn't know that we were actually supposed to be podcasting today. I misunderstood what was happening today.
It's always a podcasting day with Better Podcasting.
So let's just talk briefly here about the fact that it is the end of an era today, because if you watch us live, we do stream this live to www.geeks.live. We mentioned in the last episode that this is the last time that we are recording this show on Fridays, at least regularly scheduled. I'm sure from time to time we'll have to cram in an episode there just to keep it going out each week, but we are going through a shift. So if you missed that at the end of last episode, this week here, today is June 30th. We are recording this to Geeks.live on Friday. This is your Canada Day podcast. And then we're going to go ahead and switch it up next week. So we'll release on Tuesday. And then next week, we're going to go ahead and start recording on Wednesdays with a Sunday release. Now, here's the thing that we want to mention, because it's the summer and SP and I both are terrible individuals. We actually will not be recording on Wednesday, July 12th, because we will be away. However, there will still be a release that comes out the following Sunday. So we've got something in the hopper for that, but just know if you watch us live on Fridays, you will have to find some other way to entertain yourself on Fridays, because we are shifting to a Wednesday release time or record time.
Finding something to do on Friday nights. I don't know if podcasters know what to do Friday night when they're not recording. Yeah, I don't remember a Friday night not recording in years. Wow. This is going to be fun. I'll be able to go to the movies, stuff like that. But more importantly, we're doing this because my other podcasting schedules, and I'll take the hit for this. This is Stargate Pioneer. My podcasts have shifted, so we're taking advantage of it and moving to Wednesday, which is great for everybody, I think. And oh, by the way, Stephen, Happy Independence Day.
No, it's Happy Canada Day. I'm wearing my red and white shirt right now. It is Canada Day weekend. It comes first. It's closer to the recording day.
I don't care about Canada Day. I care about Independence Day. Woo-hoo, 1776, baby.
It's actually happy 150 to Canada, believe it or not. Ooh.
I know. I was thinking about that. United States is over 200 years old. Did you know that? Over 200. We're almost at 250, and you guys are just slipping along at 150.
So what you're saying is that if it was real life, Canada would be paying the taxes that pay for the retirement home that is the USA. You know, we pay for the US's depends, so to speak.
If you're going to pay for anything, it's going to pay for that wall that's going to go on the northern border of the United States.
Well, happy Canada Day to everybody.
And happy Independence Day to everybody else that matters.
All right, so let's go ahead and move into our contest giveaway that we've got. No, we're not giving away a country, but we are going to be giving away a brand new Audio-Technica ATR 2100-USB microphone. That's right. This microphone is here to be won by somebody. If you take a look at the video side of thing, SP is holding up that it is a cardioid dynamic microphone. And we like this microphone because it's inexpensive, it's easy to use, it's very versatile, and it is a USB / XLR microphone, which means that you can use it either USB or via XLR. This is one of the go-tos that we do recommend. Now, sometimes you find, though, that your P's pop with the ATR 2100. Well, guess what? SP has done hours of research and he has a solution.
I do. It's $2.95 on Amazon. It's called an on-stage foam microphone windscreen, and it goes over the top of the grill of the ATR 2100, and it helps the plosives. So you not only get the microphone, but you get the windscreen, because we're not gonna let you what do you call it? Flapping in the wind, in the breeze. When you get this, we're gonna set you up right, and we're gonna send you off with the windscreen.
So it goes on your grill, like when you're out on your Canada Day barbecuing. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that would make it Canada Day. Yeah, put some foam on the grill. Yeah, we don't do that in the Independence Day, so it's got to be a Canadian thing.
Okay, so how can we win this, SP? If I was not on this show, how could I win?
You could win by sending us an email at contest@betterpodcasting.com on how you want to why did you start to podcast, or why do you want to start to podcast? So that's the two things. Why did you, or why are you going to start a podcast? And get that to us at contest@betterpodcasting.com. And since this is a video and audio show, we would really appreciate a link to maybe a video file or an audio file. But hey, just a textual entry will work as well. We'll start reading those off when we get back from our Independence Day holiday.
Absolutely, after our Canada Day long weekend. We also, by the way, we should mention we're running this till the end of July 2017.
July 27th, 2017.
Yes, so that's when we were running it till, and just enter, and one lucky listener / viewer will win said microphone. We've got a couple of entries already, and we know from our crowd that people drag their heels, so that's okay. You're a podcaster. We understand leaving things to the last minute. That's a thing with podcasters.
Yeah, but make sure you don't go over that last minute, because it is a firm cutoff day on July 27th. We're not, if we get any other entries beyond that, they're just going to go into the trash.
Absolutely. The other thing that we want you to send us, a video or an audio clip, is we want to know, how have you saved your podcast? If you've been podcasting and you have saved your podcast somehow, please do tell us, how did you do this? You can send us an email to podcast@betterpodcasting.com. You can tweet us at betterpod, or go to facebook.com/betterpodcasting. We absolutely would love to hear from you. Any of the ways, just send us an audio clip, an email, but preferably a video, because as SP said, we do have a video companion as well. And then we want to know, how have you saved your podcast? So please send that our way. We absolutely want to hear from you.
We do. And matter of fact, we know for a fact that at least one listener from this podcast has how I saved my podcast story, because kind of experienced it during the last week. The individual in question saved the individual's podcast by, I won't even give that away. I will let the individual tell his or her story.
Yes, it is a mystery, but please send that our way. But let's go ahead and move on to our main topic for this week. Here we go. All right, SP, what have you decided that we were going to talk about this week? Because I believe that you are the power behind the operation that decides everything always to do with better podcasting.
I am the executive producer, the showrunner, the end all be all, and the star of Better Podcasting. So wherever I say it goes, actually, this was Steven's idea. And the idea we're talking about is selecting a new host or a new co-host for your show. We've talked about hosting. Actually, I went back and I listened to Better Podcasting 11, 12, and 13, where we talk about different styles of hosting or co-hosting or guest hosting your show. what we didn't talk about is selecting the new co-host. So say some things in life change with your podcast, which happens from time to time. If you've been podcasting for at least 2 or 3 years, you're going to be very fortunate if something doesn't change in that time period that might affect your co-host's ability to continue podcasting, or maybe you're a solo podcaster that wants to add another co-host. So people move on, they get bored, they have life happen, or they even get fired from their jobs. So you need to get somebody else to fill that empty seat. And once that happens, you have two options. You can either continue on with the current group, sans one individual, if you already were a group podcast, or in our case, if Steven or I would have to move on, then we'd have to make a decision on whether one of us was going to go solo. And that is really tricky, moving from a multiple host show to a solo show. So we'll talk a little bit about those. So those are your options if you need a new co-host. So Steven, if I was to evaluate how I would proceed with those options, what would I look at?
Well, first off, what you want to recognize is that every podcast is different. Every single one. Your experience is going to be different than my experience. I have had to replace hosts before. SP has had to replace hosts before. It is absolutely going to be different, and only you know what's right for your show. Now, we will caution you this. SP mentioned the elusive solo podcast. That term is coined by Chris Farrell of the Gonna Geek Network. And here's the thing. If you are not used to a solo podcast, we would highly suggest that you don't try that, because it is very, very different from a group show. It's very hard. There's a lot more that you have to do. Plus, it's actually very different to your audience, because your audience is used to hearing banter and things like that. And when you start to banter with yourself, you just sound kind of crazy.
Exactly. Even Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox edition that I do is really not a solo podcast, even though I'm a solo narrator, but I'm going back and forth between content and segments that are given to me by 3 or 4 other people. So I never proclaim that Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox edition is a solo podcast. It's as close as I'm ever going to get to a solo podcast, at least for now, because it would be way difficult for me to put that all together. Could I do it? Yes, but I'd have to stop doing 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 other shows. So I'm not going to do that. So it's going to be different for your audience. It's going to be different for you individually. But say, let's just look at you're facing a decision of adding somebody to a pair or a group where you've had 3 or 4 podcasters and one leaves. So there's some considerations to make. So first of all, how did you feel with your previous group? Did you feel it was overcrowded? If you had 4 or 5 or 6 people, was that too much? If that's the case, maybe you just leave it how it is and you have a departing podcaster, and then you keep the group with the smaller, sans one. So maybe it was sometimes having the extra person allowed for some flexibility. It'll say on Gonna Geek, we used to have 4 hosts for quite a bit. We're deciding whether or not to bring back a 4th host. One of the things that a 4th host allowed is if I have to leave, if Steven has to leave, if Chris has to leave any week, we still have a multiple host show with 3. So you can move ahead with that flexibility.
And that's helped us tons of time on the GonnaGeek.com show. We've usually run with 4. Actually, this is the longest run where we've only had 3. And we've had it for a couple of reasons, but the 4, absolutely. And we had people who just at the last minute, I had it happen, SB had it happen, Chris had it happen, our former co-host JS had it happen, where we just had something happen at within the last hour and we couldn't make it. Well, the other 3 can continue easily because there's still 3 of them. So that's a great example of the counter where the 4 works really well. But there have been times where I've seen shows and it's just been too many. And so sometimes losing a host could actually be a bit of a relief for you.
Indeed, if it's a roundtable sort of podcast, you might get away with 6 or 8 people. But if you have a lot of hosts and they're starting to interact and overtalk each other, butt in when the other point hasn't been finished, take a diversion, 1 too many diversions or multiple too many diversions, you might want to pare down the total number of hosts. Here's another thing, though. Say you have that well-oiled machine. Let's take a look at the Starling Tribune last year this time. We had a well-oiled machine. It was Chris, it was Neil, and myself. We were moving ahead. It wasn't the original cast of Starling Tribune, but what we had and what we made work, and we were just into it. And then we decide to add that fourth body. We added Michelle to it. It was a change in dynamic to the show. It added chaos. Different people didn't know how to react to each other. We had to relearn that all over again in the span of months. So it took some time to get to the point where you could have the well-oiled machine again, which we did for a while. And then Neil had life happen. He had to step out for a little bit. We're still hoping to have him back. But then it just became Chris, Michelle, and myself. And that was a new dynamic to learn as well. That's just two changes that has happened in Starling Tribune in the last 12 months that have been affected this way. You will add chaos to your podcast by adding or subtracting a host. So beware of that.
And you got to really be prepared for that. If you're going to go and you're going to try to fish in a new host, well, get ready, because it is a new person. It is a new dynamic. Everybody has to relearn, and you have to relearn how to react with everybody else all over, because, again, new dynamic. So excellent point there on the chaos, SP. I tip my hat to you.
Oh, thank you very much, even though you're not wearing a hat, because no Canadians wear hats on Canadian Day except for Mounties. Or if you happen to have one right next to your desk.
All right, so let's talk about the selection process here. Let's say that you're like, yes, I do absolutely want to go ahead and replace the host. How are you going to move forward? Well, first off, look within your own show. Okay, this is the number one thing, because you might have had people previously on your show guesting, and those people might have expressed an interest in doing more. And you really do want to make sure that you look at the tools that are in front of you, because you might actually have a bit of a gut reaction on somebody that's you've tried and you've tested before that you know would be a great fit. We have recurring guests all the time on the Gonna Geek show, and if we're looking to fill in that fourth, you can bet that's the first place we're going to consider, right, SP?
You're going to look within your own show. If you've had that guest that Steven just mentioned, who's a great fit, who's expressed interest, who has passion for the topic, that's an easy catch. And if you have something like that, somebody like that, that would be idiotic not to even consider that to move on. Maybe it's not the right fit. Maybe guesting is probably best for the individual for time reasons, or what, maybe a overall dynamic over the course of months. But it would be foolish not to even consider somebody that's already accustomed to your audience is accustomed to them, and you can really capitalize on that situation. And if it's not somebody that you've already had guesting, you can look within your existing resources that you have available. Say you're part of a network or part of a family of shows. You can look within those associations and see if there's anybody else that might actually want to come on to your show, or even just a guest spot to try out. And we'll get to that in a bit. But there are resources available for podcasters that are already podcasting. So if you're not part of a network, I would encourage you to at least explore that. And if you are part of a network or an association, then I would definitely capitalize on that. Now, there is a less appealing option here. And I say less appealing because I've seen it go wrong many times. And Steven, you've seen it go wrong too.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the open call. Hit up Reddit, hit up Facebook, hit up things like that. And you put an open call out there to see where there's interest. Now, this can go really wrong, or this can go really right. Really wrong, what you're probably going to find is that there's going to be all sorts of people who totally disagree with sort of the way that you have your podcast vision. And you're going to have fun sorting that out. Now, where it could possibly go really right, I will cite an example of how I did this. Was back when I did the comic book podcast called The Fanboy Buzz. We ended up doing an open call when we all of a sudden lost 2 out of 4 of our hosts, one of the 4 being myself. So that's a big change, massive change. And I remember I may have had to change my pants after I heard about that, because I was sweating, I was worried, I was concerned. But it was honestly one of the best things to happen to that show, because I lucked out. I went and I put the call out there, and I got a wonderful list of people. And yes, some people weren't that great of a fit, but what ended up happening was we planned to fill 2, but we actually got 3 really solid people that we increased our number from 4 to 5. And for that show, it actually worked really well. I caution people about using 5 on a show. It can be a lot of people, but for that show, 5 worked well. And we ended up with 3 gems that we just didn't want to say no to any of them. And so we had them all come on as permanent hosts, and it worked great. one of them had to go on to other life things towards the end of the run, but the other two stayed right till the end, till we shut her down. So absolutely, that's a great success example.
One of the really big issues that I've seen is saying no to a potential co-host that's a great fit for your show, because at some point in time, life is going to happen. It could be next month, could be 6 months from now, could be a year from now, could be a couple years from now. But it's always great to have that option to pare down and not disrupt your podcast any more than it really needs to. So I would advocate that if you're on the cusp of going from 3 to 4 or 4 to 5, you might want to consider not chopping off that last qualified applicant and going with the larger show. If it works, if it doesn't work, you'll have to pare it down. So this is a question though. Say you're looking at those 2, 3, 4 people, one person. What are some of the things that you should be looking at? So this is basically, you're the hiring official and you're looking at their resume to begin with.
You are the HR director of your podcast. That's what it is.
That is exactly what it is. You're looking at the potential applicants that have come in through word of mouth, through your open call on the website, your monsterjobs.com or whatever they call it, the job hunting, your LinkedIn network, right? So you're looking for people that are passionate about the topics that you're covering, topic or topics. They have to be passionate about it. They have to have knowledge about the topic, and they have to have passion in order to talk about different facets and to do research into it. Because I guarantee you, there will either be times where you will need to put together a list of everything that you're going to talk about, or you're going to have to research to put together that list of everything that you're going to talk about. If you don't have that passion as you do this over and over and over again, whether it's a weekly show or a monthly show, it's going to drag on you if you don't have that passion. So passion is number one. Number two is closely related. It's called work ethic. So this individual has to not only prepare for the show, but also has to show up on time, has to show up ready, has to be able to do anything else that you've asked that individual to do, whether that's promotion, whether that's something to deal with the show. Maybe it's production work that you're having the host do, whether it's editing or getting a segment together or something like that. Another thing always helps familiarity with your show. Now, if you're an HR director, you're obviously going to be intrigued by somebody that either is already familiar to your company or is intimately aware of what is going on in your company. And with podcasting, it is no different, right, Stephen?
No, you really need to know the sort of what their style is going to be. And you need to, you kind of do really need to anticipate what SP was talking about with the dynamic of other people. So don't rush into it. Like, that's the number one thing that we want to caution you on, is don't rush into it. Don't feel that you are under the wire to fill this position. You're trying to get butts in the seat. Just don't do that. Make sure you take the time to try to find the right fit for your show. That's going to be way better than just filling a seat.
And to get back to the right fit, there's 3 other things to cover: microphone skills or microphone etiquette. So they have to know how to sound good. So equipment or for quality, whatever the quality is for your show, you have to make sure that they're able to provide that. And then make sure that their style of hosting is complementary from what you already have on your show. And I'll give you an example that's worked for a lot of different sports broadcasting and radio shows: a 3-man team. So you got the straight man that's just giving the facts. You've got somebody that's steering the conversation, and then you've got a color commentator. So you got somebody that's really an expert that can do the facts. You got somebody that can tell the jokes and make it interesting to the audience. And then you've got somebody that is going to steer the entire podcast. It's going to helmet, it's going to make sure that you stay on track, because yeah, you might have a podcast and it might be able to go 20 minutes or 20 hours. Doesn't really matter. But if you have a target time frame, it's good to stay within that time frame, because you don't want to have to throw away a lot of BS stuff in editing later. If you can do it as much as you can in one take, then it's going to be great. So that's why it's important to have somebody to steer it. So that's what you're looking for: somebody, passion, work ethic, familiarity with the show, microphone skills and etiquette, audio quality, and style of hosting. So you don't have to rush into it. Steven's already run into that. But you have to be honest with anybody that is looking to be part of your show. And I really value integrity and honesty in podcasting.
Yeah, and if you tell them up front that you're trying to find the right fit, it's going to avoid a lot of hurt feelings later, because if you're stringing them along, or even you're accidentally stringing them along, you think that you've made it clear that you're doing this search, but they don't know, you might end up crushing them a little bit. But if you tell them straight up that you're trying some different people out and you're needing to find the right fit for the show, I think most people are pretty respectful of that, because they understand that it is a program that people listen to, and you got to have that. And also make sure you tell them what the expectations are early on. This might actually even help weed out some of that pool early on. You say to them, I'm a hobby podcaster. I'm not going to make money. I have no intention to make money. I'm not going to do any of this. And they go, well, then I want to make money. And then you go, okay, bye. I'm not going to work. And you can move on. Now, we actually had a listener who happened to mention something to us about this, and it was Nate from the Gonna Geek Network. And he said, just make sure that make sure that goals are clearly stated, discuss what things would work with each other and what might make the podcast stop or what might make it, keep driving on. And I loved this point. That's why I wanted to give him credit, because a lot of times people just have the best anticipation or the best hopes and they anticipate it going forever. But if you're not on an agreement on when you could stop, that could end up causing a bit of problems later. So I thought that was a terrific point, Nate, and I want to thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before on Voices of Defiance and made it very clear with everybody as we went into it, and the other hosts were very clear about it as well, Sean and Shannon, that when the show stops, we were going to stop the podcast. So when the show stopped, nobody was surprised when we said, hey, it's been a fun ride. We're going to stop this show. We might go on with some other ones, but we're going to stop this show. That's an important departure point. If you get relocated to a job or you get put on a different shift on a job or stuff like that, that's important to note too. It's like, man, if this happens, if this promotion happens that I'm gunning for, we're going to have to stop. I'm going to have to stop the podcast. And so you can make plans for that. Like and that's happened to another podcast on the network. Somebody chose another job and then was not able to continue on with the podcast because of other issues. So, okay. Either you stop the podcast or you bring on somebody else, but that is an important factor to know. So moving on in the process, so you've already done kind of your down select, your resume review, your HR. It's time to do the interview, and the interview should be with everybody on the podcast and including your audience even. And the easy way to do that is to set up a guest spot and move on. But in the meantime, you don't just cold call them and say, hey, look, we want you on the podcast. You want to find out if this person is the right individual for the show. And if you don't know the individual already, you want to take a few steps. First of all, setting up a Skype call with them is always great. If you're recording remotely, that's good. If you're recording in the same room, you might want to meet them somewhere and get to know them at a restaurant for coffee, some at a bar, wherever you want to talk that your subject is more appropriate for. Now, if you want to do a business style meeting, even the hotel lobby somewhere might be a good place to meet. And then if you feel good from that initial that initial interview, you might want to do that guest run. You might want to invite them on your show and do a test and think about what you want their duties to be in the future as well, and make it a test for them. Can they actually pull through? Can they put that segment together? Can they do the jokes on cue or just in the middle of nowhere? Can they read a chat room and be podcasting at the same time? These are all things you want to figure out on your potential new co-host before you actually offer them a job.
And when you think about that, then you can actually set it up too, so that when they come on to guest, maybe you give them a little bit reduced version of that. Let's say they are going to do that segment. You can ask them to prepare something so you can really see how are they doing that? Are they lining up? Because that might even lead to giving them a second run later, because you don't actually have to necessarily just lock it down to one. Maybe you find that short list and you go, you know what? I think that these people here are where I want to go, but I can't decide between them. Haul back that short list again. Again, remember, you're not in a rush. And maybe this time you actually full on give them the duty of a co-host. There's no babying this time. We're just going to throw you in and see how it goes, right? So keep that in mind. You can absolutely use your show as the interview process, and we encourage you to do that if you're trying to find somebody to fill that void.
A great example of this is any major news outlet. They do 2 shows a day. that are really big shows. One's a morning show and one's the evening news show. If you have an opening coming up, you can integrate that new individual into your already existing show, either as the main host for the nightly news or maybe as a second, third, fourth host in the morning show. And you can see how that works. And then you can plug and play different people. We've all seen recent examples of that on all the major news outlets. I don't care if you're a main television station like NBC, ABC, CBS here in the United States. I don't care if you're a cable news network like Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. They all have these shows. ESPN even has these shows. They used to have Sports Center, which was a newscast, but there's Mike and Mike in the morning right now. They're transferring that as well. So all of these shows have done exactly this. They've tested out different people different potential co-hosts or hosts as they've gone along, and they've seen what works and what doesn't, and they're able to make competent decisions based on that information.
And if you are, again, just being like, you know what, I call BS, Steven, an SP, that's BS. Well, let me just remind you of the glorious franchise that was Regis and Kathy Lee. It is now very different people. They have.
What's it even called now? I have no idea.
Kelly and Ryan, or Ryan and Kelly, I think. It's Ryan Seacrest and Kelly.
Ryan Seacrest is on there. This is how out of date I was. The last I heard is Michael Strahan, the Kelly Ripa leader.
I could tell you all about the gossip on Kelly Ripa and Michael Strahan, but we'll leave that for Steven's Gossip Nightly. But okay, so let's say that you've decided you know who it is, or you know the people that it is. Well, what's the next step? So what are you going to do now that you found the right fit? Well, number one, welcome them. For crap's sakes, welcome them. Make sure that you are inviting, engaging, and friendly. Make them feel part of the team so that they warm up. Then you go and you cover your butt, right?
Yeah, have that get together, get to know each other's social, and then sign the contract. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want to close the deal at that point in time. Yes, we already talked about it, setting the expectations on the show. But now you have to make sure that it is actually enunciated and understood by both parties. So ideally, you do want to get that in writing. And for Michelle, when we brought her on the Starling Tribune, we did do a contract with her. It was a very funny, laughable contract, and we have not shared that yet to this date, even though we've threatened to do that some various times. But it is, without a doubt, an actual contract. And even though it is in jest and funny, there are certain parts of that contract that we would consider holding. And we have enunciated that both with Michelle and Michelle with us, that, oh, this is true. Like the money part, that was very important that we get across. Well, a lot of the rest of the contract was funny, but the money, we wanted to make sure that no matter who was running the show, if that show ever makes money, if we decide to actually get a Patreon or a sponsor for that show, which we don't right now, it's just for fun and it's for free. Nobody pays Starling Tribune anything. Whoever's running the show would get paid to run the show, meaning that the hosting costs were covered and the URL was covered and the website was covered if we had any. So we wanted to make sure that those were covered first, no matter who's running the show. And that's enunciated in the contract. So you have to set those expectations in writing. And however you do this, if you're a hobby podcaster, maybe you can't do it in writing. So look for alternate methods, and Steven's the master of doing that.
Here's a couple ways you could do it. Number one, email. You know, first off, let's say we're not lawyers. Okay, we are not lawyers by any means. So if there's money involved, a lawyer, legal disclaimer, blah, 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 figure that out on your own. But emails are good because it can really help clear things up for each other. And that's ultimately what you want, is you want clarity between you two. So if you put it in email, at least you see in writing what you are intending to do, and they know exactly what it is. So you don't end up 3 weeks down the road and they go, so where's my paycheck? And you're like, the paycheck? What are you talking about? So it makes it very clear. Or alternatively, another great way that I've actually done this before, back with, again, Fanboy Buzz, I ended up doing Skype calls. And what I did was I made sure that the person I was talking to knew that the Skype call was being recorded. And then you talk about it. And then you give each other a copy of that file so that you both have it for reference. It's the same idea. So if there is confusion, you've got reference of what was talked about, and you can kind of hopefully come and come do a meeting of the minds and really sort it out and move forward. So it's really good. These are different ways to do it, but ultimately you just want to make sure that the nitty gritty is clearly communicated so there is not false expectations.
And once you've made that agreement, once you've welcomed them in, once you've had the get to know me social, it's time on their first official show to give them some time to announce it, to say who this is, what they're doing, and don't just bring them on and say, hey, look, we got a new host. And actually, that actually might not be bad, but you just go on with your regular and not mention anything. That's not good.
No.
You need to announce it to your audience because they're going to be like, who is this? What are they doing? Even if they've guessed it before, all of a sudden they're regular and you haven't mentioned that they're regular.
And you remember how we said before you were the HR director? Well, now you're actually the marketing director, because what you need to do is market this person. You have gone and your listeners, you've broken up with your listeners, essentially. Your former host that was there has left, and now you're trying to find a new mummy for your host or for your listeners.
Like Tom Cruise mummy?
Yes, a new mummy for a new Tom Cruise. No, but that's
for the record, I prefer Brandon Fraser.
Okay, fair enough. But no, that's seriously though what it is your audience is going to need to warm up to this person the same way you have. So you want to do everything that you did to welcome that person, but also welcome them to your audience. So don't forget that part. That is key. That is critical. And if you're just randomly bringing on a person, your audience is going, who is this person?
And then just don't bring them on and then that's it. Bring them on and constantly engage. You're going to have to tutor the new host from time to time on how you think that they're doing with the show. If they're doing great, tell them they're doing great. If you need them to stop saying or try to coach them in that. But make sure that you give them feedback. It's important. When you bring on a new employee in a company, they regularly have those quick chats, that 1 month or 2 month checkup, that half a year checkup. You have to do that with a new co-host. Otherwise, they're not going to know what's going on. And if you do happen to be a new co-host, that's a different point of view that we haven't really covered, but we're going to talk about some things really quickly. First of all, be yourself. Don't try to be somebody that you're not, because you won't be able to bring that forward forever and ever. You know, recently I became the rebel on the GonnaGeek.com show. That was a one-off. That was one show. I could not be the rebel in and out every week. That ain't going to work. So that's just an example of a persona that you cannot bring forward. You have to be yourself. For the reference,
this was absolutely hilarious. And SP was extremely relieved once it was all done. I could see the relief on his face. Like, okay, that's over. I don't want to worry about this anymore.
First of all, I was podcasting with sunglasses on. Second of all, they were not prescription sunglasses, so there's no way that I could see the show notes at all. And I told everybody that, and we just ran with it. I was podcasting blind, basically, for an episode.
If you want to check it out, GonnaGeek.com, episode 91 of the Gonna Geek Show. You can find that at geeks.link/191.
191, not 91. Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing is watch the existing dynamic that already exists on this show. If you're a new co-host coming on to a show, and then try to blend into it, because don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. You're not creating a new show. You're fitting into an existing show. So try to keep it as same as you can. You're going to be a little bit different, but don't forget what made the show great to begin with and bring that greatness forwards. Also, figure out what your job is, and that should be in the agreement that we mentioned before. But as a new co-host, follow through with that. If your job is to do show notes, do the show notes. If you're supposed to do some promotion, make sure you're following through with that and promote the show as per your agreement. You're going to get some leeway in how you actually do all of that, but just make sure you do that. If your job is to produce a segment, make sure you bring the segment. Don't do I forgot it was my turn, or I got too busy. If that happens, fine, but tell the producer, tell your other co-hosts, look, I'm not able to do this, so they can make alternative plans. And then if you're actually doing some of the post-processing, like the editing, make sure you do that as well. Another thing, make sure you equip yourself appropriately with fireworks, with USA Stars and Stripes and everything else, right, Steven?
Yeah, absolutely. You always want to have your marker no, okay, it's just a joke, but you do, though, seriously, though, want to give yourself some fanfare to a degree, and I think that's where SP was going with it, because really, you want to make sure that you are fitting in. You don't want to come across as being timid or shy. You need to not step on toes, but nobody wants to listen to somebody who's sitting in the corner and says 3 things in the course of an hour-long podcast. You don't want to hear that. You need to be forthcoming with your point of view, but also, again, don't stand on people's toes. So give yourself that fanfare, the fireworks.
And finally, one last word of advice. Make sure you're equipping yourself appropriately. We're not going to divulge into a gear discussion, our favorite topic here on Better Podcasting, but we are going to just mention, make sure you're sounding as well as the podcast wants you to sound. If you have to buy some gear, get it done with, get it over with. Make sure you stay within budget. If you're recording and you're playing through speakers, make sure you buy headphones. If you have to bring your own microphone to a group recording somewhere, make sure you bring that gear with you. Make sure you have it. Make sure you own it and you're not just borrowing it from somebody. So just make sure you're equipped to do the podcast. So that's it. That's becoming and selecting a new co-host. That's a lot of information. If you, listener, have anything in your minds of, man, I just brought a new co-host on, or man, I am a new co-host and you guys didn't talk about this, send us a note. Contact us at Better Podcasting. We're on Twitter, Better Podcasting, at Better Pod. We're on Facebook. Steven's on Facebook, Better Podcasting. And then you can always get us at podcast@betterpodcasting.com.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and say hi to Blab as we say bye to something else.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
Okay, so what's the joke about Blab? Well, we always like to talk about the fact that Blab was an amazing service that everybody in the podcast world was talking about. They're like, oh, Blab's the future! Ah! And then it died. And so we always like to talk about it being dead. And we joke because we also did basically an episode on Blab in the early days. So that's useless now. But things die, they come, they go. And so today we are giving Blab a friend as we say goodbye to Clamor.
Clamor, spelled Clammr. If you're listening to this episode after it's been published, it's too late. Clamor is already gone. If you're listening to one of the live streams, either on YouTube or through Spreaker, you might have a couple of days left, but Clamor is shutting down on July 2nd, and they're giving you till July 2nd to get any of your clamors off. There was an announcement that came out. It was published, and they said, yeah, if you want to actually grab any of your clamors, you're going to have to tweet it out and save it that way. It's a little bit of a process. I'm good with everything. I don't need to save anything that I've done. It was a lot of work. It was fun while it lasted. It originally was 16-second clips, and then they moved up to 24 seconds. But honestly, I think they were seeing the writing on the wall. It could have been a startup for all I know. I never talked to the individuals. They might have been trying to be bought out by Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or something like that. I know last week I talked about Alphonic, which now has the audiograms. And I think they're a little bit more versatile because these audiograms can be however long that you want to make them. I can tell you after experience that some social media sites will only give you so much in terms of time. I believe Instagram is like a minute. I believe Twitter is like 2 minutes, 20 seconds of video, and Facebook is endless. You can upload a video for however long you need. But this all is little snippets out of your show that you can use to promote or make a point. And I think that has been a better use of the technology, even though it's a little bit more difficult to create than Clamor was. Clamor was supposed to be instantaneous. It was supposed to be your users. They hear something funny, they clip that 16 seconds, and then they tweet it out. And that was supposed to be promotion for your show. I loved making clamors. I did, but it took 15 minutes to make some. The interface, even on first of all, it was only iOS. Second of all, the interface, even on a iPad, was limiting because it was the size of an iPhone. And it was one of the, what do you call that, Stephen? One of those expanded apps that they didn't scale to the different, it wasn't made specifically for an iPad.
I don't have a word for that. I don't know. Let's call it expanded apps. Why not?
Okay. So it didn't have a specific bigger app, and then having to drag the audio clips back and forth, it was all a little bit cumbersome. And you couldn't do it very quickly if you wanted. And if you're a producer like Stephen and I, if you wanted to make this look and sound great and sound professional, you didn't want to just cut it off halfway through a sentence or halfway through a word. So it took some time to put these things together. Were they fun? Yeah. They really hit me where I really like podcasts. I like the little funny little snippets or the informational snippets that are right there. I love that about podcasting. So that was great, but the ability to get it out wasn't great. Anyway, Clamor, obviously they weren't making any money at it and they needed to move on for other things. They shut down the service overnight. And this is just another example of another free service that shut down overnight because they couldn't make money. So little warning for those of you that are using free media hosting, they could go away at any time too.
And if you want to check this out, www.geeks.link/clamor, which is CLAMMR. We've set up that short link that takes you right to their Google Doc. Will they delete the Google Doc right away? They might not. I don't know. So by the time the show comes out, might not be around, but it might stick around the Google Drive for a while if you want to check that out. And it's sad because you got a lot of good traction on that, but I noticed it was a very sharp decline. You know, it hit its peak and then it quickly dropped off. So thank you for all your effort on that. I know you tweeted, you clamored this podcast, you clamored Gonna Geek, you even went back in time and clamored the Fanboy Buzz. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And to Clamor, all I have to say is so long and thanks for all the clamors.
And say hi to Blab. All right, SP, you put a bit of a poll out there. Why don't you explain said poll?
Well, a poll is what you put in the middle of a room if you need to support the next level of the facility. No, that's not what kind. We're not talking about a poll POLE. We're talking about a poll POLL. So kind of like a voting poll. And I put this out there on the Better Pod Twitter account. And this was an experiment in using Twitter polls. You can have up to 4 options and the characters are very limited. But so I put this out there. My podcast recording audio chain is best described by the following pathway. Number 1, USB mic into a mobile device. Number 2, mic into a portable recorder. So nothing else, just the mic into the portable recorder. Number 3, and I think this confused a lot of people, USB device into PC software. We'll talk about the confusion in a second. And number 4 was home studio setup. So we had a total of 15 votes in the 18 hours that the poll was up. That was pretty good, I think, for our first poll. There was nobody that responded that said that they were using a USB mic into a mobile device. 2 people responded and said they used a microphone straight into a portable recorder. I have actually done this before. Matter of fact, I did that this week for somebody else. I recorded a little snippet segment while I was on the road from my AT2005 into my H5, and that worked well. And then here's the confusion. And Stephen and I had a little talk about this. The number 3 was voted on by 3 people. USB device into PC software. I think that confused some people, Stephen, right?
Yeah, and I got to admit, like, I'm going to give full kudos here to SP because he really tried to make this work. Twitter polls are not easy. I've done them before. They're not easy. And the USB device was indicating something like a FireWire input or a USB input, like a Focusrite, or even something like what's the Behringer line that they've got? UCA. They've got UCA and something else. They've got a whole bunch going on right now. A UM. That's what it is. A UM line. And so that's what SP was meaning, like a USB capture device. And unfortunately, some people didn't really understand, but it got 20%. And then our last one had 67%, which was home studio setup. So I think a lot of people, though, probably chose that, though, because they use an audio mixer. And so, in my opinion, you're now into the home studio setup once you do start to add multiple components. So I think that's probably why a lot of people did that. But we don't know because it's a Twitter poll and you can't really give information other than the voting of the answer.
No, not at all. My intentions, by the way, were some sort of audio interface or a USB microphone into the PC software. So using Zencaster or Audacity or something like that. That was my intentions for that. The home studio setup, my intentions were, well, what if you have not just a portable digital recorder like Stephen and I have with the H6 or H5, but what if you have some sort of dedicated recording devices like an Apollo A8 or AP or whatever it is, and you want to have a dedicated a rack mounted dedicated recorder, because those do exist. So I wanted to include all that, and obviously it didn't translate well. So my apologies, y'all. My bad, but I tried. And the interesting part about this, though, is we got a couple of great responses from people that were responding with other tweets, not just voting on the poll. One of which was Ben Reynolds at Bray9988. And Ben said, in my new studio. Also, I just recorded episode 6 of my podcast this week. We had 6 people in the studio. It's been pretty fun. I have to say, I'm very jealous of the fact that you podcast with other people in the room, first of all. Second of all, this setup, it looks like it's not the most expensive setup in the world, but it's a good setup.
Yeah.
You got mic arms with dedicated microphones with pop filters. You got a central computer, got some sort of a mixer in there. I can't tell entirely what all the hardware is in there, but it is a great setup. I bet you that's a great time. It looks like a small room in a house or a conference room, maybe in an office space. It is an amazing setup. So Ben, congratulations.
And if you want to, listener, check this out. We set up a short link, www.geeks.link/Ben Studio. It'll take you right to the tweet. Definitely a slick, easy yet complex system. So great job. Thanks for sending that to us, Ben.
Thank you very much. Also, I put a tweet out there asking if everybody was going to miss Clamor, and Diami responded and he said, no. Creating short clips to share was too much work, and I would agree with that. I even though I like doing it, even in this past week while I was traveling, while I usually had time to do it, I didn't have time to do it. So I'm not surprised at all. But we also got a response to that, Stephen.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, did anybody else agree? To which you would act like I hadn't previously set up the fact that the story behind podcast, Emily Prokop, said, ditto, I loved the idea, but it was annoying when I had to have to wait for the app to download the whole episode just to get a 15-second clip. I agree. I think where this concept would really excel would be in a good podcast player, something that is like a tested podcast player that has the full functionality, but as you're in it, you could just go take 15 seconds or previous 20 seconds or whatever. That's where I think this concept would be the best. I would use it all the time. I didn't have an iOS device, so I couldn't use the Clamor app, but that would be how I would use it if it was built into my podcatcher.
That was one thing that was missing. It wasn't like it was Overcast combined with this. It was its own. You'd have to port in the podcast into it, which was already downloaded to your podcast app, or maybe it was in your music files that you were going to bring in. Yeah, and that was the production side of thing, where you can put different tracks in, whatever. By the way, I have deleted the Clamor app from my devices, and here's why. Because of cybersecurity, because eventually there's going to be a hack to whatever the code behind that app is. And so different people could hack into your device by that. I've noticed as Apple is progressing into iOS 11, by the way, that they've been notifying me when an app has not been updated in a while, and I will delete that as well. That's just good, conscious cybersecurity. And if you have Clamor app on your device after July 2nd, make sure you take it off, because they're not going to be updating it, and it's going to be a cybersecurity risk.
Which is going to take us towards the end of the show and leads perfectly to my promotion for the Gonna Geek Network. I almost called it the Better Podcasting Network. The Gonna Geek Networok, which has a new member that talks about cloud-related stuff, including security. You should check out Head in the Cloud podcast, available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. They are our newest entrant there on June 30th. As of June 30th, they are there. GonnaGeekNetwork.com. Really neat show if you're into that sort of techie stuff.
I know a thing or two about cybersecurity, and I've even learned some new things on his show. This is John, the lead host of Head in the Cloud. And also, he does a great job of just explaining everything to everybody. So if you use the cloud for anything, go check that podcast out, Head in the Cloud, and you will learn some amazing stuff.
Awesome. awesome. But that is indeed the end of episode 86 of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen Jondrew saying Canada, woo!
And I'm SP saying, America, go light your fireworks off. Don't lose any fingers.
Bye.
See you guys next time.
Of course we're going to talk about last week's episode. Better Podback's not done yet. No! If you missed last week's episode, go back and check that out. We had some fun last week. If you couldn't tell, SP and I are buddies. We're good friends. There was no creative differences. There was nothing. In fact, if you're watching this episode on youtube.com/GonnaGeek, you'll be seeing that I have been this entire episode pulling a fun little joke on SP because I just couldn't make it. I got to start off, I'll say congratulations to my brother. He got married and there were several days worth of events. And so there was one of the only times that I said, SP, the week before, the week after, there's no way that I can fit this in. I just can't do it. It was one of the only times we've not been able to coordinate a time between us. And so SP has missed an episode, and now I have missed an episode. And thank you so much to Emily for not only coming on the show last week. If there was going to be a replacement co-host, you would be at the top of that list. And I want to say you did a fantastic job. And thank you so much for also going along with the joke that we set up for weeks about SP firing me.
It was fun. I just wanted, as I said before in other forums, I just wanted to give Stephen a present because I knew that he was a little bit busy for actually weeks leading up to this. And I knew that there was no chance to do the episode. So I just want to give him a present. And, hey, Stephen, here you go. Here's an episode. So I got on the horn with Emily and said, hey, can you do this podcast? Stephen doesn't know about it. And she said, yes. So that was all a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, something like that. So this has been in the planning for a while. So Emily and I got to talking about what we wanted to talk about on the show. We started creating show notes, whatever. And then I started thinking about the production aspect. So I went to look to my files. And I found that I didn't have all the production files. So I had to reach out to Steven. Hey, look, I just want to do some segments in the future. Can I? And he ferreted out like, okay, you're doing a show for the week I'm gone, right? And I said, yeah, okay, I am. So we genned up the whole prank, the joke that I was firing Steven. There is nothing going on between us. I know we have both received a lot of comments. Hey, is everything all right? I'm sorry. You can move on from this. It's no big deal. So first of all, thank you to Emily for being on the show last week. Second of all, thank you to all of our listeners for being so concerned for us. We really appreciate that. We really do. And third of all, I cannot believe that you guys thought I had the power to fire Steven.
Oh, man, I got to say, so we're going to run through some of the feedback right now before we shut down because if I was a betting man, I would have lost money because the way that I heard this delivery, and if you actually go check out the description of the previous episode, you might see there was a little clue in there that the editor remained the same last week. And I would have bet SP that for sure, that nobody at all would believe it at all because the way that he delivered it was so callous. And I was just like, nobody's going to believe that. But apparently they did, SP.
They did indeed. And then there was a comment about the intro, and honestly, I was all the previous day working on something, and so that wasn't a lie at all. So there was a couple of lies that I told in setting up the joke, but for the most part, we try to stay true. So let's go through some of the feedback that received, Stephen, because we did.
Before we get there, while SP might have lied, if you pay attention to the following, you will notice that Stephen Jondrew told the truth. He may have slightly misleaded, but he told the truth the entire time. So
my hat's off to Steven for how he did that. Yeah.
So let's start off with the first one. I tweeted saying, well, the silver lining is I'm looking forward to having my Friday nights back. What did we say at the top of the show? I'm absolutely looking forward to having my Friday night back. And SP then wished me well. And Josh Liston, loyal Josh Liston, said, he said, what is exactly up here? Hard to tell if we're being given a heads up or getting messed with. So Josh did indeed think that it happened because he ended up tweeting me after saying, where and when are you going to share why you stepped down from Better Podcasting? To which I said Stargate Pioneer covered most of what I had to say in the latest episode. Let me know if you have any other questions. I'm an open book on it. It's true. He did. He said everything that I wanted to say.
Right. And yeah, a lot of people, this just points out that people were so concerned that they stopped listening to the show to contact us because they didn't get to the end. So I will say thank you, everybody, for your concern.
We also ended up having Deami Poloki give us a sad face.
He bought in basically hook, line, and sinker, didn't know what to say, but just want to say thank you very much to our fair-weathered woodworking friend for your concern. We really appreciate that.
Now, one of my favorite ones comes from Aurelia Pod.
Aurelia Pod says, what was his first one here? I hate you guys right now.
That's why it's my favorite.
Because he had asked originally, like, what's going on, man? What's going on? That tweet didn't make it in the show notes, but then he said, I hate you guys right now. And we basically said, at least we said your name right, Aurelia Pod. So both Emily and I said Aurelia Pod correctly last time. So Damien, there you go on that. And then we had another tweet by Scott Smith saying, so that's why the stock market crashed and people took to the streets. Well, my stocks anyway, and maybe not to the streets, but to Twitter. And the stock market did do badly that day, so I have to blame Steven for not being there.
Oh, and we also got a couple non-Twitter things, including from the Dave Jackson, which was, this was entertaining because he actually reached out to Stargate Pioneer. And SP, I want you to read out the subject and the date and the time of both of these emails.
Wednesday, June 28th at 9:25 a.m. So that's the Wednesday morning after the podcast dropped. And the subject is No More Moose Man? And he said, SP, is this a prank? No more Steven? I know you had scheduling issues, but when I heard you say creative differences, I was like, uh-oh. So at Wednesday, June 28th at 9:35, so 10 minutes later, a.m., he shot back with totally fished in.
And by the way, what was the name of that subject?
I didn't listen far enough.
No, the first one?
Oh, the first one was No More Moose Man? ?
Well, just for you, Mr. Jackson, I have added to my backdrop today.
And moose crossings are very important, especially when you've hit a deer.
You should check that out at www.gonnageek.com. We also had Scott Smith send us an email, and I'll let SP read that out.
SP, Emily, and surprisingly, Steven. Yeah, you guys got me. I thought something awful happened to Steven, like a curling-related incident. And we're not talking about curling irons. We're talking about that sport of curling where you push along a 50-pound weight on the ice. That's what we're talking about, curling. I was actually getting used to not worrying about future mic drops on the live recordings. Steven, no more live mic drops. I thought Emily did a fine job, but I missed the soft music in the background when she spoke. Example, Steven?
I don't have an example.
You don't have the example? Okay, well, here's what he's talking about. Have sent this message via Facebook, but not all of the above are in the 21st century. Oh, Scott, that hurts. That hurts so much. It's not my choice. Great content in your content episode. I'm going to look into Alphonic to make audio clips to put on social media to promote our show, which is good because Clamor shut down this week. Keep up the good work. Yada, yada, yada. Emily, think about doing a Seinfeld quotes episode. Scott Smith.
Which, by the way, he actually CC'd Emily on this, so that was awesome. Thanks so much for doing that.
Indeed. We did also have some snippets from Bandrew Scott over at the Podcastage channel on YouTube. He said, no, is Steven really gone from Better Podcasting? Or is this just a bit? Okay, thank goodness. Haha, I'm so relieved. And so those messages were about a half an hour away from each other. I was actually in a meeting at the time, so I couldn't get back with him. I just asked him if he made it to the end, and he said yes. And then our very own Naki from All Things Good and Nerdy podcast on the network asked Chris, the producer of All Things Good and Nerdy, of why did SP fire Steven? And Chris say, go ahead, Steven. What did Chris say back to him?
He actually said that SP went on a offensive rant against Canada, which I believe is believable.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Pay for your own dang wall, and we're building it.
But thank you, everybody who we might have tricked, or we might have made your heart stop, or we might have disappointed you when you got to the end and you realized that Emily was not going to be on the show permanently, because that was honestly my one fear. My fear with this here was I can handle the rest of the flack of people saying, "Yeah, you tricked me." I'm okay with that, but I feared people actually really liking Emily and then being crushed that we weren't keeping her on. So, Emily, thank you again for playing along. You did an excellent job again. I think you had a lot of really great things to say last episode. I edited it. I played it back twice. I really thought that it was a solid episode.
Emily, you're welcome back anytime. Just call me, maybe, call me, and we'll have you on anytime you want, Emily. It was a great episode. Thanks for coming on. And thanks everybody for putting up with us for the past 2 weeks, because it's been kind of fun for us.
It has. But that is indeed taking us for real this time to the end of episode 86 of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen John Drew saying Happy Canada Day! Woo!
And I'm SP saying no matter where you are, celebrate your right for democracy. Hoping you're in a democracy. Celebrate your right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.